Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Kansas. And of course, Kansas is a very popular progressive rock group from Kansas, and they happen to name their band after the state that they formed in. But Kansas has been around since the early 70s. I think they actually formed in 1970, but they didn't get a record deal until 73. And they consistently released, these great prog rock albums, in that mid 70s and the late 70s era. And that's when you had the classic, lineup, with Walsh on vocals, and you had Lipgren on guitar, and Rich Williams on guitar. And Rich is kind of a misunderstood, genius. He's the guy with the eye patch, the kind of older guy. He's a monster player, and I've seen some, concert footage of Kansas, and I'm just kind of watching him. And he's not like Yngwie or somebody, he's not out there, kicking and doing all this stuff. But he's very focused. When you watch him play on stage, he doesn't move around a whole lot, but he's constantly playing riffs and rhythms and little leads and counterpoint and all this stuff, with everything else going on with the keyboard and the violin, additional guitars, of course, the bass and stuff. But very interesting guitarist. And I've been a Kansas fan since I was in high school, and after they moved out of the 70s, eventually, Steve Morse, joined Kansas, and he appeared on 2 albums, Power and In the Spirit of Things. And this lesson's going to take a look at some of their chords and interesting, things hiding in Kansas's music. The opening, that was the song Silhouettes in Disguise, which is from Power. So that's Steve Morse. And, I've been a fan of that song ever since I heard it. The first time I heard that tune, I was like, this is Kansas? I was like, oh my gosh, turn that up. It's so awesome. And I'm a huge Steve Morse fan. I think, Jeff Beck for me is number 1. And then I think Steve Morse is number 2. I love Steve. And honestly, I've never seen a transcription of this song anywhere. And before I made this lesson, I did another little check online. And I looked on YouTube and Ultimate Guitar and some different places. I can't find a single reference or tab or mention of this song anywhere. And I even went ahead and looked at like set lists, during the Power tour back then. Kansas didn't even play this song live, or at least they didn't include it, in the set list that I saw. And I thought, why is there all this avoidance with this song? If you've never heard, Silhouettes in Disguise, watch this video and then go listen to it right afterward, because it's amazing. Steve Morse is kind of darting around all these little fills, and there's these 30-second note, like fast runs and stuff. And it just keeps building and building and going. And then at the end, it's like Steve Morse is finally released and he starts running around wild. And it's insane. Really cool song. But the song and the riff is loosely based around E minor. And there's some chord hits and little things happening, but I really like that riff. So right there, we're just kind of playing around, single notes. There's a few chords that jump in, and it's, like I said, loosely based in E minor. And I even like that opening, little riff right there. It's real clever the way it sneaks down the fretboard too. And I like that kind of slight pinch harmonic and the little kind of chromatic run, very Steve Morse, influence. It's just C to a single G to a D, and then you're kind of bending that G into an A. And then right here, he's basically sliding into like a little piece of an A, and there's also an organ that kind of hits at the same time. So it kind of pops out. go back into that little pinch harmonic bend. And then he does these little hits, and there's 3 of them. It's like a partial B, partial D, to partial A. And I think Steve's also still hitting the low E string in there too. You know, something like that. So it's a busy little riff. And like last time he kind of does a squeal, not quite that squealy, that was almost more like Zakk Wylde. Something like that. And then a C to a G over B to a D. And then it goes into the verse. But that's a killer intro. The next example is from the same song. This is the chorus to Silhouettes in Disguise. And there's some interesting chord-based ideas happening here too. They're spelling out the chords in the beginning. And then there's some interesting, you know, little things that pop up. It sounds like this. There we're spelling out a G power chord or a G5, and they're hitting the root, you know, twice. And then it's B flat major, but it's played like that. And then an F5. And the second time, go back to that G. You've got this really cool, kind of reminds me of Dream Theater for some reason, but you've got this little mix and match, like single note chord riff. It's really cool. Go back to that G. And then just go up to a B flat power chord. And then Steve does this really fast lick, and I believe the guitar and the violin both kind of play this. And it's basically B flat major, but you're also reaching up and grabbing that E flat. That busy sound from that lick. And go back into the intro again. Next example features a section from the song Song for America, which comes from their album Song for America from like 1975. And this features some interesting chords that pop up in a lot of Kansas's music. And I know when I first started working with, you know, some of their songs, I was confused by the chords. I thought, wait, I don't know if this is right. That's hard and weird, and definitely they're not afraid, you know, to step out with some interesting chords. So I honestly didn't take the time to watch footage to see how they actually played, you know, like fingering wise, how they played these chords. And I'm guessing they probably use a thumb wrap for a few of these, because you'll find a root note, you know, on the low E, nothing on the A string, and then you'll either find, you know, barred notes or partial chords, you know, along the D, G, and B string. So that's kind of an unusual way to play the chord. I mean, you could dampen the string here, you know, on the A string with the underside of your index finger, but then when the chord changes to this, you don't want to, you know, hear that A string. So I found using the thumb wrap is probably the best way, but it sounds like this. And right there you can see we're basically doing an F over C, and then C major, then D minor, A over C sharp, and then it's a B flat played that way, like with the thumb, and then it's a D over A, and then you're going to move all the way up to here, and you're going to play a G over D, and then a D, and then it's E minor, a B major over D sharp, and then D major, and then go go back to that A over C sharp. So it's an interesting little, progression of chords. And it's really interesting the way those are kind of put together. And I like the way the progression sounds, like the resolution between the chords, and it's moving forward, when you hear that progression. Really interesting. Almost has a classical, kind of feel to it. The next example is from the song Paradox, which I think is one of my favorite, Kansas songs. It's from Point of No Return, which is that one. And really interesting song. But this section, it only takes place, I believe, once in the entire song. And there's this little interlude, and then you'll hear this kind of funky breakdown. And I think there's like some organ or keyboard, kind of happening. So it's kind of hiding in the background. You really have to listen for it. But it's using some of these unusual chords again, which are common in, Kansas's style. So it almost has this funk, kind of feel to it. Really interesting. So that would be an E flat over D flat. And then we're going to switch and we're going to do a similar chord that we had in Song of America, but that's an F over C. Something like that. And then this is really interesting. There's an A flat over B flat. And then a B flat over A flat. So they kind of flip there on the last one. But what an interesting, sequence of chords or progression. And very unusual too, unexpected, from the norm, which I think that's one of the reasons why I really like Kansas. It doesn't sound like everybody else. It has this unique and special and very musical and spiritual, kind of sound. The next example actually is the interlude to Dust in the Wind, and you can see I've changed to an acoustic guitar. And honestly, I think Will Ferrell has forever ruined that song for me after that movie, was it Old School? When he sang it at the funeral or whatever, that was horrible. I mean, it was hilarious, but it was also awful at the same time. But this is the interlude to Dust in the Wind. And, very famous song, arguably, Kansas's, most popular song. Everybody knows Dust in the Wind. And the interlude, I think in some ways, when I was younger, it kind of like clued me in to chordplay, to finding unusual chords and interesting tonalities, and, not power chords, not major or minor chords, something different, more intricate and more involved. And I know when I first learned this song, when I hit the interlude, I immediately fell in love with these chords. And like I said, I think that kind of sparked my imagination or my creative spirit. When I learned that, it was like, oh my gosh, I want to learn 1,000 things, like this. I love it. And I still do. Really moody and mysterious. It's an A minor add 11. I'm sorry, A minor add 9. And then a G over A right there. Just flip those two notes around the other way. And then back here, this is an F6 sharp 11 over A. And then just add the D there on the 3rd fret on the B string. And that'll convert that to an F sharp 11 over A. So let's do that again. something like that. But I really do love chords like that. You know, from Kansas, you can hear things, you know, from Pink Floyd and Dream Theater, and there's, you know, Radiohead and a bunch of groups out there that have these mysterious and haunting chords, and I'm a huge fan of that. The last example comes from the song The Other Side, which is from their 1979 album Monolith, and that's kind of a, you know, forgotten album, or, you know, like the diehard Kansas fans know Monolith, but most people on the street have probably never even heard that album. But I really do like this sequence of chords. It's very melodic and dreamy, and it starts with an F sharp minor 11, and then a B minor 11, and then you've got an A 6/9, and then a D 6/9. So it's really interesting progression. Really got to be on your, you know, tips of your fingers or on your toes when you play that, because it's ringing and it's kind of clean, you know, like that, but it's ringing and the notes are changing, and you really have to watch out for, you know, hitting an open string or accidentally, you know, silencing a note that's ringing. And I'm a big fan of parts like that. They're challenging, but you have this very sustained kind of ringing sound that I really like. So I think for the F sharp minor 11, it might make sense to kind of use your thumb there. You could fret it this way too. It's kind of stretchier. But I think this way might be a little easier to play. And I think they actually used their thumb, you know, when they played it or recorded it. And then this B minor 11, it's going to remind you of like B7, but the D and the high E string are now open. Like that. And then the A 6/9, really you're just basically kind of think of like an A sus2, but you've added this F sharp right there. And right there he kind of adds the C sharp, which is kind of used as a passing tone to get to the D 6/9, which is right here. Really interesting kind of, you know, obscure Kansas song, but a really cool guitar part. It's going to wrap this look at the Chords of Kansas, and I'm definitely a fan. I'm a huge prog rock fan, or nerd, or whatever you want to call it. I love Kansas, and Yes, and Rush, and King Crimson, and any, you know, group that was kind of pushing the envelope forward, I'm a huge fan of, because as much as I like tradition and simple things, you know, like AC/DC, I also love complexity, you know, things like Return to Forever, or, you know, Yngwie or whoever. I mean, I love both sides of the coin, the technical side and the simple side too. You know, I love Yngwie, but I also love Tom Petty, you know, so it's like, well, there's a lot of ground, you know, between those two artists and artists like that. But I love it all. You know, I'm a fan of music, I guess. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.